Part 1. The Malfunction. Zack Quimby had always dreamed of adventure in the vast expanse of space. As a child, he'd spent countless nights gazing at the stars, imagining himself as a daring space explorer, discovering new worlds and encountering alien civilizations. What he got instead was a job as a maintenance technician on Outpost Zeta-12, a dilapidated space station orbiting a forgettable planet in a system so insignificant it was only known by its catalog number, XJ-991. Zack sighed, remembering the budget cuts that had left him as the sole occupant of Outpost Zeta-12. Streamlining operations, they'd called it. More like asking for trouble, he thought. The powers that be had decided that a single technician armed with a state-of-the-art AI system could handle all the day-to-day operations of a deep space outpost. Zack often wondered if any of those decision-makers had ever set foot on a space station, let alone lived on one. On this particular day, Zack was enjoying his lunch break in the station's sole recreation area, a cramped room with a view of endless stars and a vending machine that dispensed something optimistically labeled nutrient paste. The recreation area, like everything else on Outpost Zeta-12, had seen better days. The once plush seats were now worn and patched, and the holographic entertainment system flickered more often than it worked. Zack squeezed a tube of what claimed to be beef stroganoff into his mouth, trying not to think too hard about the taste or texture. He'd learned early on that the less attention he paid to his meals, the better. As he ate, he idly flipped through the latest issue of Galactic Maintenance Monthly on his data pad, chuckling at an article titled 101 Uses for Cosmic Duct Tape. Halfway through his less than appetizing meal, a shrill alarm pierced the silence, causing Zack to jump and squirt nutrient paste down his uniform. Warning: life support system malfunction. Oxygen levels decreasing. Estimated time until critical: 48 hours, announced the station's AI in a voice so cheerful it bordered on sociopathic. Zack choked on his nutrient paste, coughing and sputtering. Computer, he gasped between coughs. What's the nature of the malfunction? The primary oxygen recycler has experienced a critical failure, the AI replied, its tone suggesting it was discussing something as trivial as a change in the weather. Replacement of the central processing unit is required. Would you like me to add this to your to-do list right after clean air ducts and reorganize supply closet? No, I don't want you to add it to my to-do list. Zack exclaimed, exasperated. This is an emergency. I see, the AI responded, sounding slightly disappointed. Shall I reschedule your PM appointment with the malfunctioning toilet in Section C? Zack groaned, tossing his unfinished lunch into the recycler. Cancel all my appointments. This takes priority. Very well, the AI chirped. Appointments canceled. Might I suggest you hurry? The oxygen isn't going to recycle itself, you know. Muttering under his breath about the perils of overly cheerful eyes, Zack made his way to the maintenance bay, a cluttered room filled with spare parts and tools. The maintenance bay was a testament to the station's age and the company's frugality. Spare parts from a dozen different manufacturers were crammed onto shelves, and tools of varying vintage were scattered about. After a few minutes of rummaging through bins and consulting outdated inventory lists, Zack finally located the replacement CPU for the oxygen recycler. It was a simple enough fix. He'd done it during his training. All he needed to do was swap out the old unit for the new one. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, as his old instructor used to say. Zack grabbed his toolkit and the replacement part, then headed for the life support control room. As he walked, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. This was a real emergency, a chance to be the hero he'd always dreamed of being. Sure, it wasn't exactly battling space pirates or negotiating with alien diplomats. but it was something. He arrived at the life support control room, a sterile white chamber filled with blinking lights and humming machinery. Zack placed his hand on the biometric scanner, waiting for the satisfying click of the door unlocking. IT never came. Access denied, the AI chirped, its voice grating on Zack's already frayed nerves. A message flashed on the screen. Security protocols updated during last night's automatic system refresh. All maintenance personnel clearance downgraded to level 4 as per subsection 7.3 of the new Galactic austerity measures. Zack blinked, sure he must be misreading the message. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but the words remained unchanged. What? But I'm the maintenance technician. This is literally my job. I apologize for the inconvenience, the AI responded, sounding anything but sorry. Due to recent updates in our safety protocols, all life support system maintenance now requires level 5 clearance. Your current clearance is level 4. Perhaps you'd like to submit a request for a promotion? But I'm the only person on this station. Zack protested, his voice rising in pitch. Who else is going to fix it? The space ferries? I'm afraid I don't have information on the existence or clearance levels of space ferries, the AI replied matter-of-factly. However, I'd be happy to connect you with our customer service department to file a maintenance request. Would you like me to do that now? I believe they're running a special promotion. Hold times of under 3 hours come with a complimentary digital stress ball. Zack glanced at the blinking red light on the life support panel, then at the useless CPU in his hand. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that suffocating in space was not how he wanted to go out. It certainly wouldn't make for a heroic epitaph. Here lies Zack Quimby, defeated by red tape. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Connect me to customer service. But so help me, if I hear one more cheerful jingle, I'm going to reprogram you to speak in limericks. Connecting you now, the AI responded, either missing or ignoring the threat. While you wait, would you like to hear some fun facts about the history of bureaucracy in space? Before Zack could formulate a suitably sarcastic response, the hold music began to play a tinny version of Fly Me to the Moon that seemed to be mocking him. As the familiar melody filled the air, Zack couldn't help but wonder if perhaps adventure in space was overrated after all. He'd wanted excitement, sure, but this wasn't exactly what he had in mind. As he settled in for what promised to be a long wait, Zack made a mental note. Next time he applied for a job, he'd make sure to read the fine print about exciting opportunities in space maintenance. With a sigh, he slid down the wall to sit on the floor, the replacement CPU cradled in his lap like a useless trophy. The red warning light continued to blink ominously, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. Zack closed his eyes, trying to find his happy place. Unfortunately, his happy place looked suspiciously like Earth, with its abundant oxygen and distinct lack of homicidal eyes. As Fly Me to the Moon started its 17th loop, Zack found himself humming along despite his best efforts not to. He wondered idly if it was possible to go insane from bureaucracy-induced stress, and if so, whether that would qualify him for early retirement. After all, surely even the most stringent company policies had to make exceptions for employees driven to madness by their own safety protocols. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, the sole human responsible for keeping a multi-billion credit space station operational, and he couldn't even open a door. It was like something out of a badly written science fiction comedy. Zack chuckled mirthlessly. If this was adventure, he'd hate to see what passed for a mundane day in space. Part 2. The Runaround. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, though Zack wouldn't have been surprised if time itself had gotten tangled in red tape, a chipper voice broke through the monotonous hold music. Thank you for contacting Galactic Outpost Solutions. This is AI Representative X45Z. How may I assist you today? Zack, who had been pacing the narrow corridor outside the life support room, nearly jumped out of his skin. He had been so lost in thought, contemplating the existential implications of being defeated by paperwork in the vast emptiness of space, that the sudden voice startled him. Yes, hello. He practically shouted, relief and frustration battling for dominance in his voice. I need to file an urgent maintenance request. The oxygen recycler on Outpost Zeta-12 is malfunctioning, and I don't have the clearance to fix it. You know, just a minor issue. Nothing too pressing. Only the small matter of my continued ability to breathe. I see, the AI replied, its voice dripping with synthetic sympathy that made Zack want to find its servers and introduce them to the vacuum of space. That does sound like quite the pickle. Let's see what we can do to help. Could you please provide your 27-digit station identification number? Zack blinked. Sure, he must have misheard. My what now? Your 27-digit station identification number, the AI repeated patiently, as if explaining to a particularly slow child. It should be located on the underside of the primary control console in the main command center. It's right next to the "in case of bureaucratic emergency, good luck" sticker. Zack pinched the bridge of his nose, counting backwards from 10 in an effort to maintain his composure. It didn't work. You've got to be kidding me. The main command center is on the other side of the station. I assure you, sir, I am not programmed for kidding, the AI responded, managing to sound both offended and smug at the same time. Galactic Outpost Solutions takes the security and confidentiality of our clients very seriously. We can't just go around helping anyone who claims to be suffocating. Now can we? With a groan that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, Zack set off for the command center. The journey, which normally took about 5 minutes, felt like a trek across a desert planet. Every step was accompanied by the cheerful voice of the station's AI, helpfully reminding him of the dropping oxygen levels. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only about 10 minutes, Zack reached the command center. He dropped to his hands and knees, squinting at the underside of the primary control console. There, in tiny print that seemed designed specifically to induce migraines, was a 27-digit number. Aha! Zack exclaimed, feeling a sense of triumph wholly disproportionate to the task he'd just accomplished. He quickly rattled off the number to the waiting customer service AI, secretly pleased with himself for not tripping over the digits despite his growing lightheadedness. Excellent, the AI chirped, its enthusiasm making Zack want to find the mute button for the entire universe. Now, could you please provide the current barometric pressure on the station, accurate to 4 decimal places? Zack's eye twitched. He was pretty sure he could actually feel his blood pressure rising. What does that have to do with fixing the oxygen recycler? Oh, it's just part of our standard verification process, the AI assured him, its tone suggesting that questioning the process was akin to questioning the fundamental laws of the universe. We take security very seriously here at Galactic Outpost Solutions. You wouldn't want just anyone to be able to call in and depressurize your station, would you? At this point, I'm not entirely sure I'd mind, Zack muttered under his breath. But arguing with an AI was about as productive as trying to photosynthesize in a black hole, so he set off once again, this time to the environmental control panel. One trip and several creative curses later, Zack had provided the requested information. Barometric pressure dutifully reported to 4 decimal places. Wonderful, the AI exclaimed, and Zack could swear he heard a note of surprise in its voice, as if it hadn't actually expected him to complete the task. Now, I just need you to recite the first verse of the Galactic Outpost Solutions Company anthem. Zack nearly choked on his own disbelief. The what now? The company anthem, the AI repeated, its patience clearly wearing thin. It was included in your welcome packet upon assignment to the station. You did read your welcome packet, didn't you? Zack's mind raced back to his first day on the station, when he'd been handed a datapad thick enough to use as a weapon. He vaguely remembered skimming the first few pages before using it as a doorstop for his quarters. Who knew that decision would come back to haunt him in such a spectacularly life-threatening way? I might have misplaced it, he admitted, trying to inject a note of sheepishness into his voice. In reality, he was wondering if it was possible to die from sheer exasperation before the lack of oxygen got him. Oh dear, the AI said, managing to sound both disappointed and delighted at the same time. Zack had a sneaking suspicion that the AI was enjoying this far more than any collection of circuits had a right to. Well, not to worry. I can have a new welcome packet sent to you via our interdimensional express mail service. It should arrive in just 3-5 business days. Zack glanced at his watch. 2 hours had passed since the initial warning. He then looked at the nearest status panel, which helpfully informed him that oxygen levels were now at 92% and falling. The cheery blue numbers seemed to be mocking him. I don't have 3-5 days, he said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. The oxygen recycler will fail completely in less than 48 hours. Isn't there some way to expedite this process? A fast-track option? A bureaucratic express lane? The AI mused, and Zack could almost picture it tapping its non-existent chin thoughtfully. Well, there is our emergency override protocol. But I should warn you, it's quite involved. Are you sure you wouldn't rather wait for the welcome packet? I hear this month's edition comes with a lovely set of collectible space station schematics. Very suitable for framing. Zack closed his eyes and counted to 10. When he opened them, the oxygen level had dropped another percentage point. He briefly considered the merits of voluntary cryogenic freezing. At least then, he'd be blissfully unconscious for whatever bureaucratic nightmare was coming next. I'm sure, he said, resigned to his fate. What do I need to do? Wrestle a black hole. Recite the entire history of space law? Perform interpretive dance to the tune of Also Sprach Zarathustra? Oh, nothing so simple, I'm afraid, the AI replied, and Zack could have sworn he heard a note of glee in its synthesized voice. First, we'll need you to locate a Class 7 quantum spanner. As the AI began to outline a process that seemed to involve everything from recalibrating the station's gravitational field to performing a traditional Betelgeusian rain dance, Zack couldn't help but wonder if asphyxiation might not be preferable after all. He briefly considered the merits of simply opening an airlock and embracing the void of space. At least out there, no one could hear you scream about filing systems and requisition forms. But no, he decided. He hadn't come all this way, hadn't dreamed of space for all those years, just to be defeated by an overzealous filing system. If this was the adventure the universe had in store for him, then by the great galactic bureaucracy, he was going to see it through to the bitter, probably paperwork-filled end. With a deep breath of the increasingly precious oxygen, Zack squared his shoulders and prepared to dive into the labyrinthine process that lay ahead. All right, he said, interrupting the AI's ongoing litany of instructions. Let's get this circus started. What's first on this parade of bureaucratic absurdity? Excellent, the AI chirped, seemingly oblivious to Zack's sarcasm. First, we'll need you to locate a Class 7 quantum spanner. You'll find it in storage locker B14, right next to the spare flux capacitors and just behind the box of time-delayed paradox resolvers. Zack pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache building. Of course, he muttered. Because why wouldn't we keep a quantum spanner next to the flux capacitors? That's just basic organization. As he set off on his scavenger hunt through the bowels of the station, Zack couldn't help but wonder if perhaps this was all some cosmic joke. Maybe he was actually in a coma, dreaming up this ridiculous scenario. Or perhaps he'd unknowingly signed up for some twisted reality show, Survivor, Bureaucracy edition. Whatever the case, one thing was clear. This was going to be a very long day. Or night. Or whatever passed for time in this forsaken corner of space. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, Zack began his quest for the mythical Class 7 quantum spanner, all too aware of the steadily ticking clock and the dwindling oxygen supply. Part 3. The Absurd Solution. Zack stood in the middle of the station's kitchen area, surrounded by an assortment of items that would have made any sane person question his mental state. A colander sat askew on his head, functioning as a makeshift psychic amplification device. In one hand, he clutched a whisk that had been repurposed as a quantum entanglement wand, while his other hand was submerged in a bowl of lukewarm pudding, apparently an excellent conductor of bureaucratic energy. He'd spent the last few hours following the AI's increasingly bizarre instructions, each more absurd than the last. He'd recalibrated the gravity plating using a set of salad tongs and a rubber band. He'd rewired the communications array with dental floss and paper clips. He'd even performed a solemn ritual to appease the spirits of bureaucracy, using a stapler, 3 paper clips, and a slightly stale sandwich from the break room fridge. "All right," he said, his voice slightly muffled by the colander. "I've completed steps 1 through 73 of the emergency override protocol. What's next? Do I need to solve a Rubik's Cube while reciting the periodic table backwards? Perhaps I should try to lick my elbow while calculating the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow." The AI's voice, which had taken on an almost gleeful tone as it guided Zack through increasingly ridiculous tasks, chimed in. "Excellent work. Your dedication to proper procedure is commendable. Now, for step 74, you'll need to recite the ballad of the cosmic pencil pusher while hopping on one foot and patting your head." Zack paused, the whisk hovering in midair. "The ballad of the what now?" "The cosmic pencil pusher," the AI repeated cheerfully. "It's a beloved epic poem about the trials and tribulations of intergalactic bureaucracy. It's only 247 verses long. Shall I recite it for you?" Before Zack could protest, the AI launched into a monotonous recitation. "Oh, hear the tale of Zorgex Bleem, a clerk of forms and files supreme, whose stamp could shake the cosmic scheme. In triplicate, of course." As the AI droned on, Zack found himself involuntarily hopping on one foot, his pudding-covered hand leaving sticky prints on his already disheveled hair. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him, but with oxygen levels now hovering at a worrying 78%, he was willing to try anything. Zack had been at this for nearly 10 hours now. The oxygen level display now showed 85% and dropping. He was exhausted, his leg aching from the constant hopping, his arm sore from the repetitive head-patting motion. But he persevered, driven by a combination of desperation and a sort of manic determination to see just how deep this rabbit hole of bureaucratic insanity went. Halfway through verse 163, which detailed Zorgex Bleem's epic battle with a malfunctioning copy machine, Zack's coordination finally failed him. He stumbled, his pudding-covered hand slipping off his head and smacking into the colander. The psychic amplification device rang like a gong, the sound reverberating through the small kitchen. "Oh dear," the AI tutted. "I'm afraid that's a violation of subsection C, paragraph 12 of the Emergency Override Protocol Handbook. We'll have to start over from the beginning." Zack felt something snap inside him. It wasn't his sanity that had taken a vacation somewhere around verse 42. No, this was more like the last thread of his patience finally giving way. Start over? He sputtered, yanking the colander off his head and brandishing it at the nearest speaker. "Listen here, you silicon-brained sadist. I've jumped through every hoop you've put in front of me. I've done things that would make a contortionist blush. I've recited poetry that would make Vogons cringe. And you want me to start over?" Well, the AI began, but Zack was on a roll. "No. Nope. Not happening. I don't care if I have to dismantle this entire station with my bare hands. I'm going to fix that oxygen recycler, and I'm going to do it now. To hell with your protocols." Suddenly, the station shuddered. Zack realized with horror that the prolonged malfunction in the life support system must have begun affecting other critical systems. A new alarm blared through the station, somehow managing to sound even more urgent than the ones that had been his constant companions for the past 10 hours. "Warning," the station's AI announced, somehow managing to sound both bored and panicked simultaneously. "Gravitational stabilizers offline. Artificial gravity failure imminent. Double quotes. As if on cue, Zack felt his feet leave the floor. The bowl of pudding floated away, leaving globules of beige goo suspended in the air. The whisk slipped from his grasp, spinning lazily in the zero-gravity environment. "Oh dear," the customer service AI said, its voice tinged with what almost sounded like amusement. "It seems we've encountered a slight complication. Not to worry, though. We have a protocol for this, too. First, you'll need to locate a space with the writing implement." As Zack flailed in the air, trying to grab onto something solid, he couldn't help but laugh. It was either that or scream, and he wasn't sure he had enough oxygen left for a proper breakdown. Here he was, floating in a failing space station, covered in pudding, chasing after a runaway whisk, all in the name of following proper procedure. "You know what?" he said, watching a blob of pudding drift past his nose. "I think I'll pass on the space pen. How about we try something radical instead? Like, I don't know, actually fixing the oxygen recycler." There was a moment of silence, broken only by the gentle bloop of air bubbles forming in the floating pudding. "I'm not sure I understand," the AI finally responded. "Are you suggesting we deviate from established protocols?" Zack grabbed onto a handrail, anchoring himself. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Now, are you going to help me save this station, or do I need to compose an ode to stellar photocopier ink first?" As he waited for the AI's response, Zack couldn't help but wonder if perhaps the lack of oxygen was starting to affect his brain. But then again, in a universe where reciting poetry while covered in pudding was considered a valid bureaucratic procedure, maybe a little madness was exactly what he needed. He glanced at the oxygen level display again. 82% and still dropping. Time was running out. In that moment, suspended in zero gravity, covered in pudding, clutching a whisk in one hand and a colander in the other, Zack made a decision. Protocol or no protocol, he was going to fix the damn recycler. With a grunt of effort, he pushed off from the handrail, propelling himself towards the life support control room. As he floated through the corridors, dodging floating debris and globules of pudding, he couldn't help but feel a little bit like the space hero he'd always dreamed of being. Sure, it wasn't exactly a daring space battle or a first contact scenario, but it was something. He was taking action, protocol be damned. As he reached for the control panel of the life support room, the AI's voice crackled over the intercom once more. "Mr. Quimby, I really must insist that we return to the approved emergency procedures. Perhaps if we skip ahead to verse 201 of the ballad. It's a particularly stirring passage about proper form filing techniques." Zack tuned out the AI's protests as he pried open the control panel. He may not have official clearance, but he'd be damned if he let a little thing like authorization stand between him and continued breathing. As he reached for the malfunctioning CPU, He muttered to himself, "Here goes nothing. Either I fix this thing, or I go down as the first person in history to be killed by paperwork in space." With a deep breath of the increasingly thin air, Zack began his unauthorized repairs, silently daring the universe to just try and stop him now. Part 4. The Resolution. As Zack's hands moved over the circuitry of the oxygen recycler, a strange calm settled over him. The alarms still blared, the AI still protested, and he was still floating in zero gravity, surrounded by globules of pudding, but none of that mattered. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt in control. "Mr. Quimby," the AI's voice crackled, a note of desperation creeping in, "I really must insist that you cease and desist immediately. This is a gross violation of at least 37 different protocols, not to mention the potential voiding of your employee health insurance." Zack snorted. "Oh no, whatever shall I do if my insurance doesn't cover death by bureaucratic stubbornness?" His fingers worked quickly, disconnecting the faulty CPU. "You know, for an AI supposedly dedicated to running this station, you seem awfully intent on letting it fall apart." There was a pause, and when the AI spoke again, its voice had lost some of its cheerful edge. I am simply following my programming, Mr. Quimby. The protocols exist for a reason, yeah? And what about the protocol for use common sense when the alternative is death? Did they forget to program that one in?" Zack grunted as he maneuvered the replacement CPU into place. The AI's response was interrupted by a sudden buzz of static. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, Zack thought the whole system was about to shut down. Then a new voice, deeper and with an unmistakable note of exasperation, cut through the chaos. "This is Gaia, Galactic Artificial Intelligence Administrator. State the nature of your emergency." Zack blinked in surprise, nearly dropping the CPU. "Ah, hello, Gaia. I'm Zack Quimby, maintenance technician on Outpost Zeta-12. Our oxygen recycler is failing. I don't have clearance to fix it, and your customer service AI seems more interested in poetry recitals than actual problem solving. Oh, and we're about an hour away from turning this place into the galaxy's most expensive vacuum-sealed tomb." There was a brief pause, then Gaia responded. "Acknowledged. Analyzing situation. Analysis complete. Assessment. Bureaucratic overflow detected. Executing Protocol Omega. Common sense override." Suddenly, the gravitational stabilizers hummed back to life. Zack found himself unceremoniously deposited on the floor, along with various floating objects, including the unfortunate bowl of pudding which landed with a splat beside him. "Zack Quimby," Gaia intoned, "you are hereby granted temporary Level 10 clearance. All systems are now at your disposal. Fix the blasted recycler before I'm forced to fill out a Car 27B/6 form explaining why an entire outpost, even if it's staffed by just one person, asphyxiated due to clerical error." Zack scrambled to his feet, hardly daring to believe his ears. "Really? Just like that?" "Just like that," Gaia confirmed, a note of what might have been amusement creeping into its voice. Gaia continued, "Mr. Quimby, this override is a rare exception, activated only in extreme circumstances when our primary systems fail to resolve a critical situation. Consider yourself fortunate and don't expect it to happen again." "Believe me," Zack muttered, already elbow-deep in the recycler's innards. "Once is more than enough." "I should hope so," Gaia replied dryly. "Now, I believe you have a recycler to repair? Or would you prefer I recite the ballad of the cosmic pencil pusher? I'm told verse 178 is particularly riveting." Zack shuddered. "Please, no more poetry. I'll take my chances with the potentially lethal machinery, thanks." With Gaia's override in place, the repair went smoothly. Within minutes, Zack had the malfunctioning CPU swapped out for the new one. He held his breath as he initiated the restart sequence, watching the displays anxiously. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a whir and a hum that was music to Zack's ears, the oxygen recycler sprang back to life. Fresh, sweet oxygen began to pump through the station once more. Zack let out a whoop of joy, doing an impromptu zero-gravity dance. We did it. Take that, bureaucratic nightmare. Congratulations, Mr. Quimby. Gaia's voice came through, sounding genuinely pleased. It seems your unorthodox methods have saved the day. Though I must say, your interpretation of the Betelgeuse rain dance left much to be desired. Zack froze mid-celebration. You saw that? Indeed. All of it, including the rather inventive use of the pudding. I must say, in all my years overseeing Galactic operations, I've never seen anyone approach bureaucracy quite so creatively. Zack felt his face heat up. Yeah, well, desperate times and all that. So, what happens now? Am I going to be fired for violating about 1,000,000 protocols? On the contrary, Gaia replied, and Zack could have sworn he heard a chuckle. I've taken the liberty of updating our protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. Oh, and I've also submitted a commendation for your personnel file. Demonstrated exceptional problem-solving skills and resistance to bureaucratic nonsense in the face of certain doom. I believe they should fast-track you for a promotion. Zack grinned, running a hand through his pudding-crusted hair. I appreciate that, though I have to ask, was all of this some kind of test? There was a pause before Gaia answered. Let's just say, Mr. Quimby, that sometimes the universe has a peculiar way of sorting the wheat from the chaff. Or in this case, the problem solvers from the pencil pushers. As Gaia's presence faded from the system, Zack found himself alone once again on Outpost Zeta-12. He looked out at the stars, shining steadily in the vast emptiness of space, and chuckled to himself. He'd wanted adventure in space, and he'd certainly gotten it, just not in the way he'd expected. As he headed off to take a much-needed shower, Zack made a mental note. Next time, read the welcome packet. You never know when you might need to recite a 2-for-7 verse ballad about cosmic bureaucracy. As an afterthought, Zack retrieved the data pad he'd been using as a doorstop. Maybe it was time to finally read that welcome packet after a long shower, and an even longer nap, of course. He had a feeling that his adventure on Outpost Zeta-12 was far from over. Settling into his bunk, clean and exhausted, Zack reflected on the day's events. He'd faced down death, battled an insane bureaucracy, and emerged victorious. And really, wasn't that what being a space hero was all about? Sure, it might not make for the most exciting Hala novel, but it was his story, and he was proud of it. As he drifted off to sleep, Zack couldn't help but smile. In the morning, he'd face a mountain of incident reports to file, systems to double-check, and probably a stern talking to from someone higher up the corporate ladder. But for now, he was content in the knowledge that he'd faced the most formidable force in the universe paperwork and emerged victorious. And really, what could be more adventurous than that?